We knew that we really wanted to engage our audiences, get people talking, get them thinking in new ways, and also we wanted to challenge ourselves to learn more, and we wanted to see for ourselves what theater can do for a community. And so along came Brundibar, and immediately we started to build our connections. We're partnering with some amazing artists and organizations, and we've made some wonderful connections with people, one of whom is our speaker tonight, Dr. Ellen Handler Spitz. Dr. Spitz has explored the depths of the human psyche through the lens of the arts and artistic expression in many published works. She's the author of, I'll just name a few, it's a very impressive list, Art and Psyche, Museums of the Mind, The Brightening Glance, many other books, articles, and reviews. She has taught and lectured around the world, and having had dinner with her last night and hearing about some of her travels, that is not an understatement. And she's held fellowships at the Getty Center and the Radcliffe Institute, just to name a couple of places. Her insight into the meaning of Brundibar for the people who experienced it in Terezín is profound. She writes, "It gave them chances to transcend concretely and metaphorically their artificially restricted boundaries, to develop new skills, to experiment with social issues, to engage in competition and collaboration." And she continues, "Through communal experience, Brundibar gave the children of Terezín a much-needed sense of active membership in the human race." She's currently an Honors College Professor of Visual Arts at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And please help me welcome Dr. Ellen Handler Spitz.
Well, I'm so happy to be here in Vermont, and I want to thank Sharon for inviting me. It's very meaningful for me to be able to revisit this material, which I first encountered as a Getty scholar in, I guess, 1990. I also want to thank Wendy Stein, Trish Denton, who's the director of the show, and I want to thank my son, Nathaniel Jeffrey Liu, who made the connections. He's a professor at St. Michael's College here in Burlington. Today, with few exceptions, the presence and cultivation of the arts, music, visual art, theater, dance, have diminished in the schools nationwide, while cognitive subjects are taught and endlessly tested. Brundibar, and this is a drawing done in the camp. This is a poster for the show in the camp. A children's opera written in 1938 and performed in the Terezín concentration camp near Prague speaks to the value of the arts for children under extreme circumstances. But all children need the arts, and the power of this short opera testifies to that need, not just with regard to children helplessly caught in situations of deprivation and terror, but all the world's children. And even before going back to the 1940s and looking at the background for Brundibar, which is principally what I want to do with you tonight, I want us to recall much more recently the genocide in Sudan, in Darfur, when terrible destruction was occurring, villages being destroyed, women being raped, and human rights workers went there and they had the idea to give colored pencils and paper to the children. And the children, this is just a sign over the concentration camp. Going back, this is a photograph of the original cast of Brundibar, and we'll look at that. We'll go back to that and look at that in more detail. in a few moments. But these are orphans much closer historically to our own, to us today in 2016. These are orphan children. You can see the burnt down hut. And these children were given the wherewithal to draw. And the Spitz Institute, Jewish Institute in Chicago, I spoke there in 2006, just talking about different venues where the arts mattered. Here you can see in these drawings, these are drawings done by some of these children. They just gave them simple graph paper, colored pencils, and they developed, you can see them bearing witness to what was happening to them. Here you see a woman being approached by a man, planes flying overhead, and then fascinating iconography that the dead people were portrayed as colorless and upside down. You see that? And here you have the aggression, people coming on horses, camels with guns, fighting, going in both directions. And here again, a woman, a mother perhaps, I don't know, and then again, and what's so interesting to me aesthetically is that even though the children were portraying all of this aggression and so on, there is an aesthetic that comes through. There's a beauty and a symmetry and a certain kind of love of the color and a joy in the drawing that comes through even when the children are bearing witness to what was happening around them. And it is so important for these children, for all children, to have opportunities to express themselves in the arts, in all the different, any of the different art forms. And one very important element about the arts is communication. This is just, these are just photographs of the children showing their work to us. And why does this happen? It happens only when adults make it possible for it to happen. These children couldn't have done this if they hadn't been given the time, the space, and someone had taken an interest in their own feelings about what was happening. And so they drew it for us. So this is a still from a film that was made by the Nazis in Terezín. There was a fear, I think I imagined that the Germans were afraid that all of the murdering that was going on would somehow become known. And so they made a propaganda film to try to prove that, to show that everything was fine with the Jews. And they called this film Der Führer schenkt die Juden eine Stadt. The Führer, Hitler, gives a city to the Jews. And I'm going to talk about this more later, but during this film, they forced, they asked the children, they told the children that they had to perform Brundibar. And so we have that. The opera it's unique. It was performed and sung and acted an astonishing 55 times in those dark years between 1943 and 1944. During the Second World War, in this place, Terezín, or as the Germans called it, Theresienstadt, named after the Habsburg Empress Maria Theresa. And the place had formerly been a fortress. Here you see over the portal the spurious German work makes free. Of course, they were worked almost to death, and the only freedom that they could have after all was, in fact, death. So this was what the Germans put over the entrance to these camps. This place had actually been a fortress. Actually, there was a small fortress and a large fortress. I'm going to say more about that later. And the Germans took it over, made it into a detention camp, brought the Prague Jews and Czech Jews from around Prague into this place. Here is, this is a collage, a beautiful little collage by one of the children showing Terezín. Once again, you see the child loving making this with little scraps of paper and then using a brush to brush in around it. And this is a drawing, we'll come back to this, this is a drawing of the door of Terezín by another child, Pavel Sonnenschein. We'll talk about that also in a few minutes. And this, of course, very famously, there were poems. Children wrote poems as well as did drawings and singing, and there are books of them. And these are two of the covers of two of the books, again, with art made by the children in this camp. Here is a drawing of the main character, the title character of the opera, the organ grinder Brundibar. So, in the libretto of the opera, there is a nasty organ grinder named Brundibar. He sings, "Mightier than any czar, I am the organ grinder Brundibar." And as he plays his instrument, he puts his cap on the ground, and people come by and they throw coins into his cap. Oh, I'm sorry, I moved away from the microphone. Forgive me. But they throw the coins into his cap, and two small children, brother and sister, Aniku and Pepicek, need to get milk for their mother who's frail and ill. And they watch him, and they think, we can do the same. We can sing, and we can get money for our mother. So they try, and Brundibar becomes enraged. It's my territory, and he chases them away and threatens them. And they're very frightened. And Pepicek comforts Aniku, and eventually they fall asleep. And you are thinking, perhaps, in the back of your mind, of Humperdinck's Hansel and Gretel, which is, of course, a great influence on the composer Hans Krasche and on Hofmeister, the librettist, when they created this little opera. So, but in Hansel and Gretel, when the children go to sleep, who comes out on the stage when they fall asleep in the opera of Hansel and Gretel? Do you remember? Angels come out. The angels come. But in this opera, it's not angels. It's a cat, a dog, and a bird that come out. And the cat and the dog and the bird give the children guidance. And they say to the children, to the little boy and girl, the reason that you aren't doing what you want to do and getting attention is that your voices are so soft. Here's what you have to do. You have to get together with all the children, and with solidarity, with community, with all the children singing together, you have a great voice, and people will listen to you, and they will put the money in the cap, and you'll be able to buy the milk for your mother. And of course, that's what happens. Brundibar comes and he tries to steal the money from them, and then they chase him away, and then in the end, they have this rousing, wonderful chorus. The little boy who played the organ grinder role, the role of Brundibar, was an orphan from Pilsen. Here he is. His name was Hannes Treidlinger, and he played the role with wonderful mustachios, and he was so good that little by little, everybody in the camp began to identify him with Adolf Hitler. And so people crowded in night after night to see this. And when these children sang, this was all about revolt against what was happening to them. So this little girl who played the role of the cat survived. And I actually met her and interviewed her for many hours back in 1990 when I first began to work on. I took my first trip to Prague then, and I began to work on this. I've been to Prague several times, and since then to study a little bit and think about this stuff. Although I must tell you that I'm not a Holocaust scholar. My work is on children's aesthetic lives and the arts, as Sharon told you. So I'm not. This is more of a part of my work that is dear to my heart. So every night the children's voices rang out and met with thunderous applause. But during this time, as everybody knows, we all know, hundreds of thousands of Jewish persons, old and young, from all over Europe, were being rounded up, deported, and deliberately, systematically murdered. Here is a drawing of a transport done by one of the artists imprisoned in this camp in Terezín. His name was Bedřich Fritta, and I'm going to say more about him in a few minutes. To watch and listen to the children's lively voices and performances here in Burlington in March next month, it's very important, I think, to know that 15,000 children passed through this camp, through Terezín. And here is a drawing of one of them, made in the camp by another artist. You can see her little star, obligatory, that said Jude, the German word for Jew. And many of these children sang the music of Brundibar. Nearly all of them heard it because it was the most popular music in the camp. As I told you, people left its crowded performances humming it, chanting its finale, and begging to hear it over and over again. Of the approximately 15,000 children who passed through the camp in those years, about 100 of them survived. All the others were sent without mercy to death by lethal gas in the specially constructed killing machines of Auschwitz, sent there by the German Nazis who believed that because they were Jews, they had no right to live. They never grew up. This little boy, his name was Peter Ginz, incredibly talented child, and his diary was found. And we have, I think in 2002, we have his diary. Here's a picture a drawing that he did of a railway station. Some of these, I apologize for the photography. I took them myself in the Jewish Museum in Prague, so some of the photography isn't so great, but this is Peter Ginz, one of the children who died, and this is another one, another artist. Ruth Hinova, and here is one of her drawings. One of the most poignant moments for me in Brundibar, in the opera, is the song the children sing when they sing about being rocked in their cradles when they were babies and how their mothers could not know what they would become when they grew up. So how could art help these children? How could art help these doomed children? In the next few minutes, I want to present some background and offer a sense of the context in Terezín, so that maybe we can imagine more clearly what it might have felt to the children themselves, because that's of great interest, I think. Those who performed and those who watched. Actually, Hans Krasche, the composer of Brundibar, was a highly educated German-speaking Czech Jew, like Kafka, who studied piano and violin and wrote chamber music, lieder, a symphony, and among other works, he wrote an opera based on a lesser-known work of Dostoevsky, The Uncle's Dream of 1859. Krasche wrote his children's opera Brundibar before the war started in 1938, but he reworked it in the camp. And this is a photograph of him, and now this is a drawing of him. And This drawing was done in the camp by one of the artists who was incarcerated there, and we're going to see more of his work, Otto Unger. So this is how he looked in Terezín, the composer. The libretto of Brundibar was written by Adolf Hofmeister, and he and Krasia had worked previously together in Prague. Because they were both aware of the impending political crisis and the Nazis' exclusion of the Jews of Prague from participating in public life, Brundibar was not performed immediately and was heard only twice outside the camp during Krasia's lifetime. And this was in the dining room of a Jewish boys' orphanage in Prague called Hagibor. I want to show you a drawing from the camp, which is very relevant to this, because this is a drawing by a little girl who is showing you how this beautiful park was now closed to Jews. Only Aryans or non-Jews, whatever we want to call them, could go into the park, and she used the park that she covets has the beautiful color, and the rest, what's accessible to her, is not is given less color, less intensity. So this is the change in everybody's life. After those performances in Hagibor of the opera, Brundibar's composer, its director, and all the children were wrenched from their homes and exiled to Terezín. Miraculously, though, the slender little half-hour-long opera did not disappear, but instead sprang to new life and took on completely new meaning in the midst of the camp. And there it became a beacon of hope to all associated with it in any way. Here is one child's amazing, I think it was incredible, watercolor of one of the buildings of Terezín. Her name is Sonja Valjenova, and she was 16 years old. Terezín had been a fortress in the 18th century. In peacetime, 6,000 Czechs people had lived there, 6,000 people. The German Nazis confiscated it, took it over, and turned it into what they called an Übergangsghetto, or a transition camp. After evacuating it, they crammed it to overflowing with 65,000 Jewish people. Children, parents, grandparents, taken against their will, forced away from their own homes, schools, their prized possessions, occupations, family life, pets, and normal everyday worlds forever. This is the inside courtyard of the large fortress. One child wrote, "I have lived in the ghetto here more than a year, in Terezín in the Black Town now. And when I remember my home so dear, I can love it more than I did somehow. Oh, home, home, why did they tear me away? Here the weak die, easy as a feather, and when they die forever. Yet we all hope the time will come when we'll go home again." Here is a photograph of prisoners lining up to get food, and you can see the familiar architecture of this camp. And this is one of the most poignant, for me, of the drawings of a little pet, a little doggy that obviously was left behind. And the child, the artist who's drawing it, remembers this dog, and she will never see her pet again. Among the prisoners incarcerated at Terezín were the creme de la creme of Jewish intelligentsia. talent and genius that had flourished in this sophisticated capital, the matrix of Eastern European arts and culture. They were musicians, composers, visual artists, theater directors, intellectuals, poets, critics, scientists. If you go to the archive, I'm not sure it's still open for everyone, but as a scholar, or you get a chance, you go through, it's unbelievable to go there and see what they did, because even against all odds, while in Terezín, they kept culture alive. There were lectures, there were concerts, there were performances, readings. It was amazing, and here are two programs I got to hold with my white gloves in the archive. So on the left, you have a program for Carmen. Imagine performing it in Terezín, and Zelenka, who did the sets for it, was the same one who did the sets for Brundibar, which I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. And then here on the right, you have The Bartered Bride, the opera of The Bartered Bride by Bedřich Smetana, the Czech composer. So even in this place, you had the desire to keep the arts alive, hand-done programs. There was no way to do much, but whatever they could do, they did. Here is a drawing, and these artists, some of these artists were co-opted by the Nazis to do some kind of, drawings for them, whatever they needed to have drawings done, but clandestinely, the artists did document the camp. There was a wonderful, Massachusetts College of Art did an amazing program called Seeing Through Paradise. Some of you are nodding. I gave a talk there in which they did a whole exhibition on the secret hidden drawings that artists did of what was really going on in the camp. And here's one of them, and you can see a performance going on in an attic, people crowding in to see it. And then here, a performance in a courtyard. Could almost imagine Brundibar, but it's not. And then people hanging out the windows to participate. So the arts gave people something so crucial, even in this terrible place. I really wanted to say at the beginning, I forgot to say this, so I want to say it now, that I really want to dedicate this presentation to my late friend Walter Marks, who came over to the United States on a kinder transport and whose grandparents both died in this camp. I'm remembering it now because this is what happened to the old people in the camp. They were just allowed to die. They were allowed to die of malnutrition, cold, and disease, because they couldn't work. There was no reason to keep them alive. And here are two drawings. The one on the left is by Otto Unger, who did that drawing earlier that you saw of Hans Krasche, of the composer. This is his drawing of that. I won't bother you with the names of the artists of the other two artists, but there were a number of artists there. One fine artist who painstakingly documented the life in the camp, he's the one who did the drawing of the transport that you saw a few minutes ago, was Bedřich Fritta, who died horribly of malnutrition along with so many others. And I want to return to him later at the end of this talk, and to a present he made for his own child who survived the war. Here are drawings. Oh, I've shown you the drawings of these, so I want to go on now back to the children. So this is the closed door of the barracks at Terezín, and I always have a frisson with this drawing because life in the camp was all about closed doors. There were no open doors. Everything was a closed door. So here you have the closed door drawn with so much passion. I mean, the lines. this is a door that doesn't open with bars on the windows. And this drawing was by a boy called Pavel Sonnenschein, who died in Auschwitz at the age of 13. And Pavel also made this watercolor that I want to show you of the interior of one of the buildings. Many children drew pictures of the interior. So this is the interior, and if you look at it, you'll see he draws it in perspective, watercolor and brush. The materials that they were able to use were not great, but here's a human figure. And then if you look up here, you see lights. But what else do they look like?
Eyes.
Yes, they look like eyes. Surveillance. Have any of you been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C.? So you know that the way that museum is laid out, there's nowhere you can go where you can't be seen. There's nowhere to hide. And the whole idea there is to give you that experience of what it's like to be in a place where you cannot hide. You have no privacy at all. So I think that subconsciously, there's something here about that notion of surveillance. This is another child, a different child, documenting the bunk beds with the numbers. And of course, to dehumanize somebody, all you have to do is just call them by a number rather than by their name. So this drawing was done by a girl called Helga Vaisova. She was one of the 100 children who did survive. She was born in 1929. And there you can see the bunk beds with the trunks underneath. The trunk is labeled with the house, the room that she lived in. And then there's a woman sitting at a table there, a matron. And we don't know who the matron is. But every time I look at this drawing, I want to imagine, and one of the things that's so incredible about looking at this is that we know so little. A lot of this is unnamed. We didn't know the names of the children who sang in Brundibar. We don't know. I like to look at this woman and imagine her as a particular woman. A woman named Friedel Dicker Brandeis, who was a remarkably talented, highly successful Jewish artist and designer. She was born in Vienna, trained at the Bauhaus in Weimar. Practically no women were trained there, got in. And Friedel, after fleeing the impending Nazi onslaught, this is what she really looked like. And this is from an exhibition of her work, photographs of her. After fleeing the impending Nazi onslaught by escaping into the countryside and then moving from place to place with her Czech Jewish husband, was forcibly sent to Terezín in her 40s. Friedel was childless, not by choice. And when she got to Terezín, she made a decision that she would live with the children. And for the rest of her life, she had 2 years to live. From the time she got into the camp until the Nazis took her away, she lived with the children in one of the girls' houses. It was L410 where she lived. And she had this little nook, this little room, which she fixed up in a cozy way so the girls could come in and talk with her, you know, and she decided that she was going to teach art to them, give them a chance to draw and do something in the arts. And that's what she did for the rest of her life. This is just a poster about the Bauhaus, an exhibition on the Bauhaus. And this is a painting, one of Friedel's paintings, you see a self-portrait, probably think it may be a self-portrait in a train, in a car of a train. Trains became huge symbols, as you all know, in this period. As we gaze at the drawings tonight and also think about the music, I think it's so important. I said this before, but I have to repeat it, that we give children chances, our children who are free children as well as children in these situations, to have chances to sing, play instruments, dance. And as I said before, if the human rights workers hadn't given that chance to the Darfur children, they wouldn't have made the drawings. So Brundibar's first director was Rudolf Freudenfeld. He worked all day in stone mines at hard labor. And in the evening, he came back. They had a piano with no legs. And up in the attic, one of the buildings, he rehearsed the children for Brundibar. The children were terrified and anxious because they knew that there were explosions in the mines, and they feared that maybe he wouldn't come back one evening to them. At this legless piano, he taught the cast of Brundibar their music, while the charismatic and lovely Camilla Rosenbaum taught them to dance, so that, as Ella Weisberger, the survivor, told me, she made every child feel like a ballerina. Friedel was one of the very few women of her day, as I said, trained at the Bauhaus. This is a picture of her when she was in the Bauhaus, and this is one of the drawings that she inspired, we might say, in the camp. The little boy was called Josef Baumel. So Friedel, in the Bauhaus, those of you who know about the Bauhaus, the artist couldn't just do one medium. You had to do everything. You had to do printmaking, you had to do painting, you had to do sculpture, you had to do design, you had to design upholstery, you had to design wallpaper, everything. And it was amazing for Terezín because she could help the children. She scrounged material. She was able to help the children find ways to make art. She wasn't limited. The Bauhaus had taught her to be creative in every possible visual way that you can imagine. So her influence on, and she's had exhibitions at the Jewish Museum in Paris. I gave a talk on her at the Jewish Museum in New York, an exhibition of her work. She's still very well regarded. She influenced as many children as she possibly could, including the children who sang in Brundibar. Her passionate commitment to craft and skill inspired everyone, and she tapped a deep vein of knowledge. She had studied with Walter Gropius and Mies van der Rohe, and to the children of Terezín, she brought invaluable riches. She gave them experiences of focused concentration at a time when everything was fragmenting around them and everything was unpredictable. She gave them a chance to focus. She gave them a chance to express themselves, to have that release of self-expression. And she gave them moments of pride in their work and even joy in this unspeakable place. And many of the drawings done under her aegis survive to bear witness to this. But how? How did the drawings survive? How is it that we have them today, after she and all the others were killed? Parents and children, men and women, husbands and wives, and brothers and sisters were all separated in the camp. The camp was segregated by gender. 2 years after their arrival in Terezín, Friedel heard that her husband had been selected for a transport. He was leaving Terezín. Now, nobody knew where the transports were going. There were terrible rumors, but no one had ever come back to tell the truth. And when Friedel heard that her husband was going, she didn't want him to go alone. And so Friedel Dicker Brandeis volunteered for the transport. And shortly, that she and her husband were gassed to death in Auschwitz a few days later. Before she left, fearing the worst, she gathered together as many of the drawings as she possibly could of the children. We have about 4,000 drawings. I haven't seen them all, but I've seen a lot of them. And they're in the archive in the Jewish Museum in Prague. Some of them are not. Some of them are in other places. Some of them are in the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, the Yad Vashem. Some of them are in here in Washington, I think, in the Holocaust Museum, but most of them are there. What did she do? She packed them tightly into 2 suitcases, and she hid the suitcases. And after war and liberation by the Allies, us, the suitcases were found. And their contents are all that we have of the children who died, in most cases, a priceless legacy. The feelings you have when you touch them, see them, are really indescribable, because there's so much life, so much talent, so much passion, it all cut off for nothing. And we know so little about the children. Many of the drawings, most of them weren't signed at all. I'm showing you a lot of the drawings I'm showing you are signed, but many of them were not signed. But this one is a collage by a little girl named Sonia Spitzova. And it's, of course, a theater. She's making a theater. There's the audience. And she signed it up there on the top. Nearly all these children were Czech Jews. Many of them spoke Czech at home. Sonia, according to her older sister, was a very strong-willed child. She absolutely refused to learn German because, she said stubbornly, she was sure that after the war it would be a dead language just like Latin. And so Sonia died in Auschwitz at the age of 13. This is a bit of stitchery that was done on a piece of ledger paper that, see the needle stuck in there, and it's such a beautiful image of how Friedel just found scraps of anything and got these kids to make something out of them, got them to be creative with whatever she could find. I'm sure she detailed kids. She had kids looking, to find these things, wherever they could find them, and then to bring them back and work with them. Scraps of colored yarn transform the dull page into a scene bursting with life, even including a butterfly. And the butterfly was always a symbol for freedom. Here's this is a very famous one on the cover of a book of poetry by the children, and here is a very crude watercolor. Here's the butterfly, and the child is using the brush. But I love this because there's so much freedom in this. It's just, this is about freedom. This wonderful watercolor image. I once worked with a schizophrenic child at a residential treatment center for schizophrenic children in New York, and this picture reminds me that's another kind of child under duress. And I know in the audience we have people who are working in art therapy. This is another way in which the art becomes a way of surviving in the mind, and even when the body is not always doing so well. Several of the children wanted to draw the Passover Seder. This was a beloved motif. The little girl who did this was called Eva Meitner. Another little girl, Berta Konova, made a similar image in colored pencil that can be seen in the museum in Prague. And this is another Seder picture by a little girl called Dorit Weiser. Here you can see the Seder plate, the candlesticks, and the father with his big hat, and all the family gathered around the table. how the children must have missed this favorite family holiday with its special rituals, its dramatic story, its songs, its repetitions, and its emphasis on children. Notice we saw the hat on the father, and everything clearly marked. The child is remembering this holiday. And I think these wistful drawings, and there are a number of them that you can see, express the sorrow of a Jewish child who is missing the family's annual festive celebration of Pesach. And here is a Hanukkah picture. Here's the Hanukkah. Look at the symmetry. And then these wonderful evergreen trees on either side of the image. And it's a Hanukkah picture. I mean, it's a sad Hanukkah picture, isn't it? There's a gloom about this picture, because I think the child must have been longing to celebrate this holiday, which of course was forbidden. Every expression of Jewish life was streng verboten, of course, in the camp. The little girl's name was Irina, who did this picture. What else was there about home that was left behind? We already saw the little Scotty dog, which I brought back for you. And there's this wonderful cat, which I saw in Prague. I don't have an image of it, but one child missed a pet cat. And there's, this is a park, a merry-go-round. And this little girl, Ruth Hinova, was born in 1934, and she was sent to her death in Auschwitz at the age of 10. 10. So she must have done this when she was 9. In this drawing, I feel she's happy. She's thinking of the pleasures of a carousel and swings. It's an incredibly happy picture. And after all, isn't that what art is for? And music, and Brundibar. And this is a little girl in a room, and I think this is really interesting because it's almost like a mélange to me of home and the camp. So elements of home that she misses, like a little vase of flowers, and yet you have the bunk beds, which are from the camp, and she's sort of mixing, her name was Ruth, mixing elements of both of her worlds. This is a fantasy collection. Notice how the children in Terezín are making pictures for the most part which represent their wishes and their memories, unlike the children of Darfur who are in the midst of a war and are doing witness drawings. I didn't see any Darfur drawings that hark back to a happier time. Here, it's mostly about that, much about that. So you have this wonderful meadow, somebody in the grass, and there's the feeling of joy and color. It's another watercolor, beautiful image. And then a horseback rider. Again, the sense of freedom, so much action, so much motion, nothing is static there. Renata was her name. You just want to know so much about these children. You want to bring them back to life and, somehow. And this is this is an incredibly intricate picture. So what have we got here? This is none other than an illustration of the story of Pyramus and Thisbe from Book 4 of Ovid's Metamorphosis. The boy was called Stephen Pollock. And here they are, Pyramus and Thisbe, whispering to each other through the chink in the wall. Imagine how that resonated in this place, where you couldn't talk to your husband, you couldn't talk to your mother, you couldn't talk to your brother if you were a girl. So here you have Pyramus and Thisbe, and then on the wall, it looks like possibly a picture of Shakespeare, because this boy was smart enough and educated enough to know that Pyramus and Thisbe was used in A Midsummer Night's Dream. So I think that's fabulous. So Friedel also encouraged her charges to illustrate Bible stories. Who can see what that is?
Abraham. Jacob and Israel?
No. It's Cain and Abel. It's Cain killing Abel. It's Cain and Abel. And what's this? Yes. This is a tree. This is a tree with a snake curling around it. Her name was Jana. Yes. So sometimes they did that. Always I think Friedel wanted to keep their minds alive and to get them into another space. She sometimes told them stories. She played music for them. Here, I forgot this. Someone has to help me with this. So this is the Purim play of Esther, right? By this boy, Pavel Bergman. So this must be Esther, right? But who do you think? Which one is Mordecai and which one is Haman? What do you think? Is this Haman?
There's a three-quarter hat.
Yeah, that's right. So that must be Haman, and that must be Mordecai, right? What do you think, Sharon?
I would go with the...
I think that might be Mordecai. That must be Haman, and this must be Esther. And why is she big? She's big because she's the most important character in the story, probably. Now, every now and then there was a dark drawing, and here we have a very scary image. This looks like the door of Terezín, and here you have a child. She looks like she's fleeing, and her hands are up in front of her face, as if she doesn't want to see something or is protecting herself. In any case, it's a scary and upsetting image. There are very few of them, but we do have some. It's another one where you have maybe there was a story, it must have been a story here. She looks like a princess here, surrounded by darkness, maybe frightened or trying to, and then this dragon with claws. And then some kind of other character, sort of ineffectual, soft character over here. The little girl's name was Doris. So something frightening is going on in this image. This is very rare. Here you have a Nazi guard and a Jew, because there's a star. And I find it fascinating that the guard is angular, and the weak one is all done in curving lines, and then the star. So this is nothing aggressive is actually happening, although this arm seems detached from the body.
He's got a bat.
Yes, absolutely. So right. So it isn't shown happening, but right, it's potential, or the arm is detached from the body, which is a little upsetting. And then this one, which is a teacher sending a child away, and we don't know what it is exactly, but we know that children were sent away from school. Children were not allowed to go to school anymore. They were sent away from school. Suddenly, school, which had become a friendly a school was a place where children of different faiths and different backgrounds could come together. Suddenly, the Jewish children were no longer welcome. The Nazis forbade schooling in Terezín. They were not allowed to have any kind of instruction, except the Nazis didn't seem to think art was important. So this was okay. The arts couldn't matter. So and school was forbidden. Here you have a drawing of a school. little girl called Kitty Brunner. And in the original set for Brundibar, there was only one word on the set, and that was the word school. It was written on the set. School was, what they didn't have was created in the art. When in preparation for the first iteration, when I got interested in this a long time ago, and I did interview Ella Weisberger, who played the cat in Brundibar, she said that although many children had their hair cut very short against lice in the camp and so on, she was allowed to wear hers, let hers grow longer, and wear it in 2 ponytails for ears. She told me that the wish to go to school, to go back to school and sit in a classroom with other children and learn formally again was overwhelming. All the children longed for this experience, and this was missed, she said, even more than food. Which brings us to the stage set of Brundibar. Here is the poster and the drawing we looked at earlier. Rudolf Freudenfeld, who was the son of the orphanage director Hagibor, presided, as I mentioned to you, and Zelenka, who had previously been an architect, designed the sets for the original production. Camilla Rosenbaum, universally adored, coached the children in movement and dance. And this is Zelenka's drawing of the set, one of the drawings of the set. The children were, the cat, the bird, and the dog were behind the fence. And when it was their time to appear, those things, whatever they are, came down, and they stuck their heads through the holes in the fences, and that was how they appeared. In the still from the Nazi propaganda film, you can see the word Skola, school, on the actual set. I wanted to mention something about this film. So the film was made June 23rd, 1944, what am I saying, was the date that the children performed it. And the Nazis forced Kurt Guran, who was a famous Berlin impresario, film director, and actor, to direct it. They told him that if he didn't, he refused, and they told him that if he didn't, they would execute him immediately. So this is Kurt Guran and his previous Berlin life. It was screened for the International Red Cross in an attempt, as we know, to persuade them that all was well. And after the children performed, they were rewarded with a piece of cake and black pudding. This is a photograph of the children dressed up for the Red Cross. They were given clothes to wear. They were spruced up. Old people were put into wheelchairs and wheeled out. Their faces were rouged. They were given, their hair was fixed. Everything was done to pretend fraudulently that the Jews were all right for this film. But one of the artists documenting it shows you the false fronts that were put up. This is a grocery store, Lebensmittel, and a perfume store. They certainly didn't have these things in the camp. And then behind that, you see the wagons of the corpses. And what do we see here? Probably two lovers or a husband and wife stealing a kiss, because there was no way, they weren't supposed to have any contact with each other. So behind this false front, you see them. And here's another one. This was the coffee house. And here you have these emaciated people supposedly enjoying themselves in this make-believe, and people playing music in this make-believe, with a guard here, make-believe coffee house. that was supposed to persuade everybody. That was so mostly this is what the artist did, but Bedřich Fritta, whom I've mentioned earlier, had a little boy in the camp, and the child was called Tommy. And his gifted papa wanted to make him a picture book in celebration of his 3rd birthday, a momentous event in his short life. And I would like to close this presentation on art and children and hope and the background of Brundibar with a few pages from this extraordinary book made by a father for his son in this desolate place. Its title page shows us a small boy looking out the window of the fortress at Terezín. He stands on a trunk marked with his name, but unlike the bird in the sky, he cannot fly away. He is locked up. He has no real delicious birthday cake. So his father draws one for him. And in the opera Brundibar, the children in the first scenes crowd longingly around a baker and an ice cream man who are hawking their imaginary wares on stage. And as we look at this picture book by Bedřich Fritta, we must try to imagine what it may have felt for those young singers with their thin legs and empty bellies. All they had was make-believe. Here, Fritta shows little Tommy scribbling. And then, I love this, he asks him, "Will you be a painter like me when you grow up? Will you be a painter too?" And then we see another page. I'm just showing you a couple of pages. There are a lot of them, in which we see him turned into a little junior Talmud scholar, studying the sacred writings of his people, completely forbidden, of course, in reality. And now here's a scene outdoors. In open country air, the sun is shining, and all we see is a crumbling fragment of a wall over here. Walls are broken down. The butterfly and the nude child is frolicking outdoors with all the flowers, and underneath it is written in Czech, "This is not a fairy tale, it's the truth, pravda." This really, he's telling the child, this really exists. This is real. There is a world out there. And then another one, this too, this is also true. This is also real. And then at the very end of the book, there's a page that expresses this father's wish for his child in 1944, with war and death exploding all around them. A father who never lived to see his child grow up. And he writes, "And for the year 1944, I wish you." Freedom, sunshine, good things to eat and drink, and look at that. The American Statue of Liberty, freedom. And so we learn that the greatest wish for this child in this place on the part of his parent was that he might manage somehow to get out of there and come here, to us, to come to this free country. That was the father's dream, and that is the American dream, isn't it? To be a land of refuge to all who are in need. Soon we'll be able to watch a local performance of Brundibar here in Burlington, Vermont. Over 60 years after it was performed in Terezín, and the cast is, I think, entirely non-professional, just as it was at the start, but their passion and joy in the music and the story will bring it to life for you. And as we watch and listen to the living children, healthy children, singing together, I hope we will keep the actual children of Terezín in our minds and hearts, for by doing so, in a crucial way, we are preserving their memory. And side by side with that, we are also and this is also supremely important, affirming and bearing witness to the immense power of art and music to nourish and sustain us, all of us, young and old, even in the darkest of times. Thank you very much.
And I just need to take a moment to thank people who have made this possible and institutions. So thank you once again to Ellen for being here tonight, to Dr. Spitz for being here tonight, Burlington City Arts, the Miller Center for Holocaust Studies at UVM, and particularly Dr. Alan Steinweiss, the Vermont Humanities Council, the Scholar in Residence Program at Ohapi Tzedek Synagogue, Susan Leff, Rabbi Joshua and Kathy Chasen have supported the lecture series in particular. Sorry, I'm still very choked up from this presentation. And as we've mentioned, the show opens on March 11th and runs for 2 weekends, so we really hope you'll join us. Thank you for coming.